The adoption ceremony was packed wall-to-wall applause rising every time a child's name was called. But in the back corner, 8-year-old Emily Reyes sat alone, her 2 small shoes biting into bleeding heels, her cotton dress 2 sizes outgrown. No one came. No one looked. Until Elijah Brooks, a quiet black millionaire who hadn't been seen in public for 3 years, stopped mid-aisle. Without a word, he knelt, removed his own polished leather shoes and placed them beside hers. The room went silent. Her guardian rose from her seat, face drained white. The Maple County Civic Center had been decorated for joy that morning. Pastel balloons clustered at every doorway, a long banner above the stage promising that every child deserves a home, in gold cursive lettering. Cameras clicked. Flashbulbs caught new families mid-embrace. Volunteers in matching blue polos wheeled silver carts of warm cookies and small paper cups of juice between the rows. From the speakers in the ceiling, a soft string version of an old hymn played quietly enough that it sounded like memory more than music. In the very last row of folding chairs, Emily Reyes sat with her ankles crossed and her hands folded in her lap, the way a girl is taught to sit when she has been told for a long time that her body is too much. She was 8 years old. Her dress was the color of weak tea, washed so many times the cotton had thinned at the elbows and pulled tight across her shoulders. Her shoes had been the right size 2 summers ago, and the leather had split along the seam where her heel rubbed raw. A thin pink line of blood had soaked into the white sock above her ankle. She had stopped looking at it. Looking at it would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean asking for help, and asking for help meant being a problem. She had been told that morning to wear her best dress because there would be photographers, and to smile if Marla put a hand on her shoulder, and otherwise to stay where she was put. She had nodded. She had not asked questions. Questions were expensive. The world she had learned to live inside was a world where every word she did not speak was a small coin she got to keep. A volunteer pushed a cart down her aisle. The cart held cookies wrapped in wax paper, still warm enough that the paper steamed faintly when it moved. The volunteer smiled at the family 2 seats over and handed them 3 cookies. She passed Emily without looking. It happened a second time and then a third with the careful, accidental thoroughness of a person who has been trained to notice everyone and somehow has not been trained to notice this. Emily watched the cart roll past for the 3rd time and folded her hands tighter. She did not cry. Crying was a sound, and sounds drew attention, and attention was almost always disappointment. In the corridor outside the auditorium, in a hallway that smelled of fresh coffee and floor polish, Elijah Brooks was reading the same paragraph of a contract for the 3rd time without absorbing a word of it. He was 41. Strangers usually guessed older. Grief had a way of moving into a man's posture and refusing to leave, and he had carried his for 3 years without setting it down. He had come to the courthouse only to sign the final paperwork on a small endowment he had named for his son. Micah Brooks had been 7 years old when a delivery truck ran a red light on a Tuesday afternoon. The watch on Micah's wrist that day, a plastic race car novelty he had begged for at a gas station, had stopped at 4:17 and never started again. Elijah had not left the house without it in his inner pocket since. He did not give interviews. He did not appear at galas. He had built a software company in a garage at 24, sold a piece of it in his early 30s, and now lived alone in a 4-bedroom house where the coffee maker only ever brewed for one. The Brooks name still mattered on the financial pages. The man behind it had become a rumor most people only half remembered. A security guard turned and watched him too long as he passed. A woman crossing toward the restroom shifted her purse to the far shoulder when their paths crossed. He did not flinch. He had learned over 41 years that a tall black man in a tailored coat at a courthouse was never simply a man crossing a hallway. He was first an explanation strangers wanted to demand, then sometimes a person. He had stopped trying to correct it. Correcting it required energy, and grief had taken most of his energy long ago. He took the long way around to avoid a cluster of photographers gathered near the auditorium doors and ended up beside the coffee station instead. That was when he heard the voice. It came from the other side of a tall ficus in a brass pot, low and warm, the kind of voice trained on phone calls to donors. As long as I am her guardian, The trust stays under my signature. You worry too much, Raymond. She is a quiet child. She has never once asked a single question. A small laugh followed, soft as a closing door. Elijah did not move. The voice belonged to a woman in a cream cashmere coat, mid-40s hair the color of polished walnut, a thin gold cross around her neck. She tucked her phone into a leather clutch, smoothed her sleeve, and walked into the auditorium without ever glancing at the man standing 6 feet behind her. For the first time in 3 years, Elijah turned toward a sound instead of away from it. He found her in the back row. He did not yet know that her name was Emily. He saw only a small girl bent forward in her seat trying to ease one foot out of a shoe without anyone noticing. The shoe was crusted at the heel. When she felt his shadow fall across her lap, she shoved her foot back inside so fast that she bit down on her own lip to keep from making a sound. She looked up. Her eyes were the color of river stones, and they were already apologizing before her mouth opened.
"I'm sorry,"
she whispered.
"I didn't mean to."
He did not let her finish. He had heard that sentence before. Micah had said something close to it on the last morning of his life, when Elijah had noticed his sneakers were a size too small, and Micah had folded into himself and said, "I'm sorry, Daddy, I didn't mean to grow." Elijah's knees hit the carpet before his mind caught up to them. He did not speak right away. He bent down and unlaced one of his own shoes, then the other, and set them carefully on the floor beside hers. The leather was soft and dark polished that morning, by habit the kind of shoes that cost more than most people in the room earned in a month. Side by side with the split little shoes, they looked like an accusation no one in the room had been willing to make out loud. A mother 2 rows over saw it first and pressed a hand against her mouth. A photographer from the local paper raised his camera, then lowered it again without taking the picture, as if some part of him understood that this was not a moment for a flash. Conversations near the cookie cart trailed off into nothing. Even the volunteer who had passed Emily 3 times stopped pushing her cart and looked back finally at the child she had been overlooking all morning. When Elijah spoke, his voice was not loud. It traveled because nothing else in the room was moving. "You don't have to apologize for hurting." Emily's bottom lip trembled once, and then steadied the way a candle flame dips in a small draft and recovers. She did not know what to do with a sentence like that. She had never been handed one before. He lifted her into his arms with the careful ease of a man who remembered exactly how a small body weighed, and he carried her in his stocking feet down the long aisle toward the lobby. Halfway across the auditorium, the woman in the cashmere coat stood up from her seat. The blood had drained from her face. She was not afraid of what he had done. She was afraid of who had seen him do it. A few aisles to the left, a woman in a navy blazer with a county lanyard clipped to her collar was watching with her lips parted. Her name was Diane Carter, and she had worked in child welfare in this county for 19 years. Elijah had met her twice before at scholarship board meetings. He caught her eye over the top of Emily's head and tilted his chin toward the lobby. In the lobby, he eased Emily into a folding chair near a small refreshments table and bought her a paper bowl of chicken soup from the warming tray. She held the bowl with both hands as if it were something fragile that had been entrusted to her by mistake. She did not eat right away. She watched him the way a child watches the door of a room she is not sure she is allowed to be in. "It's yours," he said. "All of it." She picked up the spoon. She ate slowly, carefully, the way of a person who is not sure the bowl will still be there if she looks back down at it. He sat across from her and did not ask her many questions. He remembered that Micah, when he was tired or sad, used to chew each bite 40 times and refused to say why. Some children did not need to be interrogated. They needed to be allowed to be small in the presence of an adult who was not going to take anything from them. Halfway through the soup, Emily looked up at him for the first time. She did not smile. She did not speak. She simply looked at him directly for one long second, the way someone confirms that a door they thought was a wall is actually a door. While she ate, Elijah stepped 2 paces away and lowered his voice for Diane Carter, who had quietly followed them into the lobby. "Open a welfare check on her," he said, quietly, not as a complaint. "Just look." Diane's hand tightened on her clipboard. She knew the name attached to the cashmere coat without having to ask. Marla Grayson sat on the boards of 3 of the city's most photographed charities. She gave the keynote at the county's annual Christmas gala. Her face had been on a billboard along the interstate for an entire spring, smiling above the words, "Building Brighter Futures." For a long moment, Diane did not answer. Her gaze drifted to Emily, who was now cradling the empty paper bowl against her chest as if it were a small, warm animal she had been allowed to keep. "All right," Diane said. "I'll look." It was the kind of yes that costs something. Elijah understood. He nodded once and walked back to the table, and he sat across from Emily and watched her finish a second piece of bread without saying a word, because sometimes the kindest thing a man can do for a child who has been hungry for a long time is not speak at all. There are people in this world whose presence is read before it is understood. A black man in an expensive coat at a courthouse is one of them. He enters a room and he is in the first half second a question. What is he doing here? Who let him in? What does he want? And only later sometimes a person trying to do something good. He learns to walk through corridors as if his hands had been preemptively accused. There are also in the same room children who are never read at all. The quiet ones. The ones who do not cry, do not interrupt, do not pull on sleeves. We have built a culture that turns its head toward noise and praises the children who go unnoticed for being good. Such an easy child, people say. Never any trouble. What we do not always understand is that never any trouble can be the sound of a small person who has learned that there is no safe way to be in trouble. Society is fast at speed. It is slow at the kind of looking that tells a child, "I noticed you." The world has been working on its reflexes for a long time. It still has not finished learning how to see. And it is in that gap between the speed of judgment and the slowness of seeing that whole childhoods are quietly lost. Sometimes the most useful thing one human being can ever do for another is not rescue them in a single sweeping gesture. It is simply to stop long enough to actually see them, to notice that the chair in the corner is not empty, to notice that the apology was for being alive, to notice and to stay noticing until the child in the back row begins to believe for the first time in a long time that she has been found. Marla Grayson did not raise her voice that evening, and that was the first sign of how dangerous she was about to become. She sat in the cream leather chair in her study, a glass of Pinot Grigio untouched on the side table, and she made one phone call. Her voice was warm and low and slightly tired the way she sounded at fundraisers when she wanted donors to feel they were the only person in the room. She told her attorney that there had been an unfortunate misunderstanding at the ceremony that afternoon. A well-meaning gentleman had become inappropriately attached to her ward in a public setting. She did not want to make trouble. She wanted, she said, to draw a careful, gentle legal line. She hung up and crossed the hallway to Emily's room. The door at the end of the hall, the one cut into what had once been a laundry pantry. The bed inside was narrow. The lamp on the small wooden nightstand cast everything in the soft yellow color of a kitchen at midnight. There were no books on the shelves because Marla believed that children who were given too much became ungrateful. There was no poster on the wall because Marla disliked the disorder of children's tastes. There was a single notebook on the desk, and inside the notebook were the schedules of the 3 charities Marla served on, written in Emily's careful pencil hand, because Marla had told her that learning to be useful was the first lesson a girl ought to master. Marla stood in the doorway for a long minute and looked at the sleeping child. She did not feel cruel. She felt in her own way responsible. She tucked the blanket up to Emily's shoulder and turned off the lamp. The next morning, Diane Carter knocked on the front door at 9 o'clock with a clipboard and a polite smile and the quiet professionalism of a woman who had walked into many homes that looked perfectly fine on the surface. Marla offered her coffee. Marla offered her a tour. Marla answered every question with the soft certainty of a person who had nothing to hide. The bed was made. The blanket was clean. The closet held 5 matching outfits on identical wooden hangers. The room was by every measurable standard the county used sufficient. Diane wrote down what she saw. Her hand shook only once when she opened the desk drawer and found a single grocery store birthday candle never lit, wrapped carefully in a paper napkin and stored beside the notebook of charity schedules. She drove back to her office and sat in her car in the parking lot for 10 minutes before she could go inside. She thought about her own mother who had lost a brother to a foster placement in 1973, and about the way her mother had told that story only once, and only at the kitchen table and never again. Diane wrote her report carefully neutrally the way the system asked her to. Then she opened a second file on her own computer. Notes that were not part of the official record. Things she had seen that the form had no box for. Across town in a glass-walled office 20 floors above the river, a young attorney named Naomi Bennett was reading the same file Diane had just closed. Elijah had hired her 2 days after the ceremony. She had come recommended by a retired judge he trusted. She was 33 years old. She kept a framed photograph on her desk of a woman who looked like an older version of herself, and she did not explain it to clients. She listened to him describe the girl in the back row, the shoes, the soup, the woman in the cashmere coat, and she did not interrupt. When he was finished, she opened the photograph Diane had taken of Emily's bedroom, and she went very quiet. Elijah watched her for a moment and asked if she was all right. Naomi set the photograph down on her desk and aligned its edges with the corner of her blotter before she answered. "I grew up in a room very much like that," she said. "My grandmother kept me. She was not unkind. She simply did not know how to be kind. I do not take cases for money, Mr. Brooks. I take cases when I recognize the room." He did not know what to say to that, so he did not try. He nodded once. She nodded back. From that moment, the two of them were no longer client and counsel. They were two people who had agreed without ceremony to fight the same fight for two slightly different reasons. Naomi began with the trust. The trust had been established by Emily's father, a structural engineer named Daniel Reyes, 3 weeks before the car accident that killed both of Emily's parents on a stretch of highway outside Asheville. The trust had been valued at the time of his death at slightly more than $2 million. It was meant to fund Emily's education, her medical care, and a modest stipend for whichever family member or appointed guardian raised her. Marla Grayson had been a distant cousin on the mother's side. She had stepped forward at the funeral with tears and a notarized letter and a smile that no one in the family had quite known how to refuse. In the 3 years since the trust had paid out a great deal of money, and almost none of it had gone to Emily. $47,000 had been billed under Guardian Image Management, a category invented by Marla's accountant, which appeared to consist mostly of professional photography sessions and a public relations consultant. $22,000 had been routed to representational charitable presence, a phrase Naomi read aloud twice as if hearing it might force it to mean something. $9,000 more had paid for a parenting wellness retreat in Lucerne, Switzerland, the previous spring, a trip Marla had attended alone while Emily had been left for 9 days with an unpaid neighbor. The trust had paid $0 for therapy, 0 for tutoring, 0 for new clothes after the second year, 0 for a single field trip swimming lesson library card or birthday cake. Elijah read the spreadsheet twice. Then he put his head in his hands and stayed that way for a long time. When he finally lifted his face, his eyes were dry, but something in his posture had hardened in the way iron hardens after it has finished cooling. "File the audit request," he said. "All of it. Everything." Naomi had already drafted the petition. She slid it across the desk. He signed. That same week, in a low-brick elementary school 6 miles east of the courthouse, a third-grade teacher named Patricia Hayes noticed that the quietest girl in her class had come to school 3 days in a row with a warm lunch. Patricia had been teaching for 26 years. She was the kind of woman whose hair had been the same shoulder-length brown since 1998 and whose desk drawer always held a spare pair of socks for any child who arrived in wet shoes. She had watched Emily Reyes the way she watched all of her quietest children, with the patient, unobtrusive attention of an adult who has learned that the children who never ask are usually the ones who most need someone to notice without being asked. For 3 years, she had watched Emily come to school with a granola bar and an apple in a brown paper bag day after day, the same lunch, the same silent eating in the corner of the cafeteria. For 3 years, she had watched Emily flinch every time another adult raised their voice, even in friendly excitement. That Tuesday, Emily opened a thermos of macaroni and cheese, still steaming. On Wednesday, a small turkey sandwich with the crusts cut off. On Thursday, a thermos of tomato soup and 2 oatmeal cookies wrapped in wax paper. After school on Thursday, Patricia knelt beside Emily's desk while Emily was packing her bag. "Sweetheart," she said, "who made your lunch this week?" Emily looked at the floor. Her shoulders rose and stayed up by her ears for a moment before she remembered to lower them. "A man," she said very quietly. "He told me I don't have to say sorry for being hungry." Patricia did not let her own face change. She thanked Emily for telling her. She walked back to her classroom and closed the door, and then sat down at her desk and cried briefly and silently, the way teachers cry with the heel of her hand pressed hard against her mouth so the children in the hallway would not hear. That night she wrote a letter on her own time and her own printer paper. She wrote about a girl who had arrived in her class 3 years ago, weighing 42 pounds at age 6. She wrote about the morning Emily had asked in a whisper whether she was allowed to use the school bathroom or whether she needed permission. She wrote about the day in 2nd grade when Emily had brought a Mother's Day card she had made and quietly thrown it in the recycling bin before the bell rang because she had remembered she said that she did not have anyone to give it to. Patricia signed the letter and slid it into an envelope addressed to the Maple County Family Court. 3 weeks later, that envelope would become one of the most important pieces of paper in Emily Reyes's life. There is a particular kind of cruelty that does not show up in photographs. It does not leave bruises. It does not raise the volume of a household. It does not require a locked door or a withheld meal. It works instead through paperwork, through neat signatures on quarterly statements, through phrases like guardianship and image management and representational presence. It works through the slow conversion of a child on the books and in the practice from a person into an asset. We do not as a country have very good language for this. We have entire shelves of laws written for the loud kinds of harm. We have far fewer for the harm that looks like a clean blanket and a notarized letter. A girl can sleep in a converted laundry pantry for 3 years, and her room can pass every welfare inspection on the form because the form was never written to ask whether a child has anything she loves in the room with her. The form was written to ask whether the room has a bed. There are tens of thousands of children in this country who live somewhere on the long, gentle slope between cared for and managed. We do not see them on the news. They do not run away. They do not call hotlines because the children most carefully managed are the children who have most thoroughly learned that calling does not work. They grow up on paper looking absolutely fine, and then sometimes they do not grow up at all. They become very polite, very useful, very small adults who never quite learn how to take up the room they are standing in. Marla Grayson had not invented this slope. She was simply very good at walking along it. Within a week of Naomi's audit filing, Marla took the fight out of the paperwork and into the daylight. A small glossy item appeared in a regional lifestyle magazine that ran heavily on social media. The headline read, "Tech Heir's strange new attachment is grief, driving Elijah Brooks to replace his lost son." The article was short on facts and long on photographs. There was the picture of Elijah carrying Emily down the auditorium aisle, cropped tightly, so that the rows of stunned faces around them disappeared, leaving only the image of a tall black man holding a small white girl in his arms. A morning television commentator picked up the piece 3 days later. She did not say anything outright. She did not need to. She tilted her head at the camera and said with a careful little smile that viewers ought to be cautious about wealthy men who inserted themselves so suddenly into the lives of young girls. She allowed her sentence to trail off, especially when they don't quite. And then she gave a small shrug that finished the thought for her because the people watching had already finished it themselves. Within 48 hours, the board of directors of Elijah's company called an emergency conference call. He took it in his home office with the door closed. The room had not been redecorated since Micah had drawn a picture of a lopsided giraffe on the corner of one wall in marker, and Elijah had never quite been able to bring himself to paint over it. A senior board member named Raymond Whitlock spoke first. The same Raymond whose name had drifted across the courthouse hallway from inside Marla Grayson's phone call. Though Elijah had not known it then, and would not know it for another 2 weeks, when one of Naomi's investigators traced the connection through a small charity Raymond's wife co-chaired with Marla. Raymond suggested with great delicacy that perhaps it was time for Mr. Brooks to step back from any public-facing initiatives until the unfortunate noise around his personal life subsided. He used the phrase optics issue 4 times in 11 minutes. He did not at any point ask whether Elijah was all right. Elijah listened with his hand wrapped around the small plastic watch in his coat pocket. He thought about the picture in the magazine. He thought about how if the man in the photograph had looked like Raymond Whitlock, the headline would have read, "Grieving Father Comforts Forgotten Child." He thought about how a single act of kneeling could be a sermon when one man did it, and a suspicion when another man did, and how the only difference was a thing neither man had chosen. He told the board he would not be stepping back from anything. He told them very quietly that the next person to suggest he should was welcome to suggest it in writing. He hung up. He sat alone for a long time. Outside the window, the last light of the afternoon caught the edge of the giraffe drawing and held there. He had spent 3 years learning how to be invisible. He was beginning to understand that invisibility had been a luxury and that he was not going to be allowed to keep it, while he was learning that Diane Carter was being summoned very politely to her supervisor's office. Her supervisor was a tall, soft-spoken man named Gerald Pope, who played golf every other Saturday at the same country club where Marla Grayson hosted her annual silent auction. He did not raise his voice with Diane. He never did. He sat behind his wide oak desk and folded his hands and observed with great gentleness that sometimes the most dedicated caseworkers were also the ones who became the most attached, and that attachment in their line of work could occasionally cloud judgment. He did not say her name in the same sentence as Marla Grayson's. He did not need to. He suggested kindly that perhaps Diane might want to step back from the Reyes file and allow another caseworker, someone with fresher eyes, to take it on. Diane went home that night and stood in her kitchen for a long time with her hand on the back of a chair. She had 2 children of her own, both grown. She had a mortgage. She had 8 years until she could retire with full benefits. She thought about the birthday candle in the desk drawer wrapped in a paper napkin never lit. The next morning, she did 2 things in order. First, she walked into Gerald Pope's office and formally recused herself from the Reyes file in writing citing personal investment in the welfare of the child. She asked that the case be reassigned to a colleague named Renee Alvarez, a woman she trusted, and Gerald, surprised by the request, signed off on it before he understood what had just happened. Second, on her own time that afternoon, Diane drove across town to Naomi Bennett's office and set a thick folder on her desk. It contained every off-the-record note she had taken on the Reyes home, every observation that had not made it onto the official county form, dated and signed in her own hand. "If they fire me," she said, "at least let it be for the right reason. And let me be a witness, not a supervisor. I cannot be both." Naomi looked at the folder. She looked at Diane. She did not say thank you because thank you was not a large enough word for what was sitting between them. She placed her hand flat on the folder and simply said, "All right." Naomi's investigators, meanwhile, had been quietly assembling a picture of Marla Grayson that the cashmere coat had been built to obscure. She had grown up in a 4-story house in a wealthy suburb of Hartford, Connecticut. Her father had been a regional bank executive who collected daughters the way other men collected automobiles, with a careful eye toward presentation and resale value. Marla had won her first piano competition at 9. She had been written about in the society pages of 3 newspapers by the time she was 15. At 19, 2 weeks before a wedding, her father had spent 18 months arranging to a young man from a family his bank wanted to do business with. She had walked out of the rehearsal dinner with a single suitcase and disappeared. She had not come home for almost a decade. She had returned in her late 20s, polished, gracious, smiling, and she had begun very deliberately to rebuild herself inside the only kind of life she had ever known how to belong to. The world of charity boards and donor luncheons, the world where adults owned things and where the things they owned sometimes were people. She did not hate Emily Reyes. She did not particularly think about Emily Reyes at all. She had simply done at the only scale available to her what had been done to her. The girl in the converted laundry pantry was not in Marla's mind a captive. She was a continuation. She was the only kind of relationship Marla had ever been taught a grown woman was permitted to have with a child. This did not excuse her. It explained her. And it made her, in the end, more dangerous than a simple villain, because a simple villain can be talked out of the fight when the cost grows too high. A person who believes she is restoring the natural order will fight to the last page of the last filing. The petition came on a Friday afternoon. Marla's attorneys filed an emergency motion alleging that Elijah Brooks had unlawfully interfered with a minor in the care of a court-appointed guardian, that his contact had caused observable psychological distress to the child, and that his financial resources had been used to manipulate the welfare system into harassing his legitimate guardian. The motion asked for an immediate restraining order, forbidding any contact between Elijah and Emily until the custody hearing. The judge in chambers granted the temporary order on its face pending review. Elijah was permitted one final supervised visit. It was held in a small beige room at the Family Services Building, the kind of room with a two-way mirror along one wall and a stack of board games no one ever played with on a low shelf. Renee Alvarez sat in the corner with a notebook, professional and unfamiliar, doing the job that Diane had decided she could no longer do without compromising the case. Diane herself had not been allowed in. Emily came in wearing the same tea-colored dress. She had heard through the cracked door of Marla's study the night before every word of what Marla had told her attorneys, that Elijah was using her, that he was unstable, that he was going to ruin himself over a girl who was not even his. She had heard, and she had understood the part she was assigned to play. She was the cause. She was the trouble. She sat across the small laminate table from Elijah. She did not lift her eyes.
Please don't come anymore,
she whispered.
Please, I don't want you to get in trouble because of me. I'm not worth that.
Elijah did not answer with words. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He took out the small plastic race car watch that had not moved its hands since 4:17 on a Tuesday afternoon 3 years ago. He set it gently in the center of her open palm and closed her fingers around it. "Hold this for me until the hearing," he said. "I'm coming back for it. I promise." She looked at the watch. She looked at his face. She did not ask whose it was. Some part of her already knew. She put it in the pocket of her dress and held her hand over the pocket the entire way back to Marla's car. There is a particular tragedy that happens to people who are hurt for long enough. It is not only that they begin to expect to be hurt, it is that they begin to believe they deserve it. They learn to apologize for their own hunger. They learn to name themselves the trouble. They learn to step in front of the people who try to help them and tell those people, "Please go save yourself. I am not worth this." And the heartbreak of it is not only that they say it. The heartbreak is that they mean it. To love a person who has been taught to believe they are a burden is not a soft act. It is a long, patient, unspectacular act. It is not the moment of rescue. It is the 10,000 quiet moments afterward when you refuse to leave, refuse to flinch, refuse to confirm by even the smallest sigh the fear they were raised inside of. Sometimes the gentlest thing a grown person can ever offer a hurting child is not a grand gesture at all. It is the simple, repeated, unremarkable refusal to walk away. The proof said again and again with the body more than the mouth that staying is allowed, that staying is possible, that staying is at long last the truth. The night before the hearing, Emily lay awake in the converted laundry pantry with the small race car watch resting in the center of her chest, exactly over the place where her ribs rose and fell. She held her hand on top of it. She could feel the still hands of the watch through the thin cotton of her nightgown, and underneath the watch, her own heart beating quietly and without permission the way it had always beaten. She had been told she would be asked questions in a courtroom in the morning. She had been told that what she said would matter. She did not believe that part. People had been telling her for 3 years that what she said did not matter, and the world had agreed with them every single day. She did not know how to stop believing the world. She sat up at some point past midnight and tore a page from the back of her arithmetic notebook. She wrote a sentence in pencil. She read it. She erased it. She wrote it again. She did this 7 times. The sentence kept saying the wrong thing in the right words, or the right thing in words too small to hold it. On the 8th try, she folded the paper into a small square and slid it into the pocket of the dress that had been laid out for her on the chair. The new dress that Patricia Hayes had quietly bought from a department store the week before and dropped off at the Family Services office where Renee Alvarez had agreed to bring it the morning of the hearing. Across the city in the office on the 20th floor, Naomi Bennett set a paper cup of coffee on the desk in front of Elijah Brooks and did not sit down right away. She looked at him for a long moment, the way a person looks at someone they have come to respect more than they had planned to. "You don't need to be perfect tomorrow," she said. "You only need to be the man who knelt in that aisle." Elijah turned the cup slowly between his palms. The light from the window was the gray-blue color that Maple County took on in late autumn, the color of stone and old water. He had not felt Micah standing behind him that evening. For the first time since the funeral, he had felt his son standing somewhere just to the left of him, near enough that if he reached his hand out at the right moment, he might brush a small shoulder. He did not say this to Naomi. He only nodded and she nodded back, and she went home and let him sit alone with the coffee until the building grew dark. The Maple County family courtroom was smaller than the auditorium had been and far more crowded. Reporters filled the back rows. 2 sketch artists worked at the press table. The judge was a woman in her early 60s named Margaret Holloway with iron gray hair pinned at the nape of her neck and a face that gave away nothing. Marla Grayson's attorney was a tall man named Richard Ashford, white-haired, expensive, the slow Boston cadence of a person who had argued in front of judges since before half the room had been born. He rose first. He spoke for nearly 40 minutes. He described Elijah Brooks not as a villain, but as a tragedy. A father who had buried a son and never recovered. A man who had walked into a public ceremony and seized upon a vulnerable child to fill a hole nothing in the world was ever going to fill. He moved to introduce a sealed envelope. He told the court it contained records related to grief counseling Elijah had attended in the months after his son's death, obtained, he said, through a routine subpoena to a former insurance carrier. He suggested that the records would speak to a pattern of psychological instability. Naomi was on her feet before he had finished the sentence. "Objection, Your Honor. Those records are protected under both state therapist-patient privilege and federal HIPAA statute. Counsel has not produced an authorization signed by my client, and an insurance billing record is not a clinical record. We move to strike the entire line of inquiry and to refer the manner of acquisition to the bar for review." Judge Holloway's eyes moved from Naomi to Ashford and held there for a full 5 seconds. She did not raise her voice. "Counsel," she said to Ashford, "you will hand that envelope to the bailiff sealed, and you will not refer to its contents again in my courtroom. The objection is sustained. Move on." Ashford moved on, though something had visibly shifted in the room. The judge's face had lost its patient neutrality. Marla, in the second row, very slightly closed her eyes. Naomi rose for her presentation when Ashford had finished. She did not raise her voice either. She did not need to. She placed 3 things on the small evidence card in order. First, the spreadsheet of the trust account, every line item highlighted 3 years of it, beginning with $47,000 for Guardian Image Management and ending with $0 for any expense ever incurred on behalf of Emily herself. Second, the photograph of the converted laundry pantry taken by Diane Carter on the morning of the welfare visit, the narrow bed and the empty walls and the single notebook of charity schedules on the desk. Third, the letter from Patricia Hayes, 4 pages long, the careful handwriting of a woman who had watched a child arrive at school hungry for 3 years and had never been invited to say so on any official form. Then Naomi did one thing more. She called a witness whose name had not been on the original list, a soft-spoken woman in her late 50s named Constance Murray, who had been working a coffee station in the courthouse hallway for 22 years. Mrs. Murray, redirecting boxes of stirrers behind the ficus in the brass pot on the afternoon of the ceremony, had heard very clearly every word of a phone call placed by a woman in a cream cashmere coat. She told the courtroom what she had heard. She told it slowly and without flourish, in the manner of a woman who had repeated the sentence to herself in private many times to be certain of every word. She had not wanted to come forward. Her supervisor had encouraged her not to. She had come anyway, she said, because she had a granddaughter the same age as the child in question, and she had not been able to sleep for 2 weeks. Naomi turned to face Judge Holloway directly. "Your Honor," she said, "this is not a man searching for a replacement child. This is a man who refused to look away when no one else in the room was willing to look at all." Mr. Brooks did not insert himself into Emily Reyes's life. He noticed that no one had been in it. There is a difference, and the law, when it is at its best, knows the difference. Judge Holloway set her pen down on her desk. She did not write anything for a long moment. She simply looked again at Elijah, and this time the weight of her gaze had shifted into something closer to recognition. When the bailiff asked whether the minor child wished to address the court, Emily stood up. She was wearing the new dress. Her hair had been brushed by Renee Alvarez that morning in a small side room near the courtroom, the two of them barely speaking, Renee working the brush gently through tangles that no one had brushed out in a long time. Emily walked to the small witness stand and climbed the single step and sat down with her hands folded in her lap the way she had been taught. The square of folded paper was in her pocket. She felt for it. She closed her fingers around it for a long second, and then she let go. She looked up at Judge Holloway. She did not look at Marla. "I don't know how to write things or say them right," she said. Her voice was very small in the wood-paneled room, but the room was so quiet that nothing was lost. "I tried to write what I wanted to say, but I couldn't, so I'll just say it the way I know how." She drew one slow breath. "When Miss Marla looks at me, she looks at my trust. I didn't always know that. I do now. When Mr. Elijah looks at me, he looks at me. I don't know all the right words, but I know the difference between being seen and being counted." She looked for the first time across the room at the cream cashmere coat folded over the back of Marla's chair. She did not look at Marla's face. "I don't want to be money," she said. "I want to be somebody's child." The courtroom did not breathe. Judge Holloway reached for her water glass and did not pick it up. Her hand stayed beside it. Marla Grayson lowered her head, and for the first time in the proceeding, the gesture did not look like strategy. Somewhere underneath the polished surface, she had spent 30 years building a much younger woman, 19 years old, and standing in a hotel banquet hall in a wedding dress she had not chosen, remembered what it felt like to wish that anyone in the room would ask her what she wanted. 2 hours later, after a brief recess and a longer conference in chambers, Judge Holloway returned to the bench and read her ruling in a voice that did not waver. The trust of Emily Reyes was frozen effective immediately pending forensic accounting. Marla Grayson's guardianship was terminated. A criminal referral was made to the district attorney's office regarding the misuse of trust assets. Emily was to be placed that evening into the temporary care of a licensed emergency foster home contracted to the county, while Elijah Brooks's home study character references and supervision plan went forward on an expedited schedule. The court would reconvene in 6 weeks to consider full transitional guardianship to Mr. Brooks, with Renee Alvarez assigned as supervising caseworker for the duration. Marla did not cry. She sat very straight while her attorney gathered his papers. She did not look at Emily as she left the courtroom. She walked out the way she had walked in, with her chin lifted, and she would never see the child again outside of a deposition room. Elijah did not stand up right away. He had to wait until his hands stopped shaking. The 6 weeks that followed were not easy. Emily lived in a small, clean room in the home of a foster mother named Linda Hartwell, who was kind without crowding, and Elijah was permitted supervised visits 3 times a week. He brought books each time. He read aloud. He did not push. He let Emily set the speed of every conversation, and accepted with patience he had not known he possessed. That some afternoons she only wanted to sit beside him on the porch swing and watch the light move on the maple leaves. The home study went forward. The character references came in 23 of them, including a sealed letter from a retired judge that Naomi had not asked for and never named. The forensic audit of the trust opened a second criminal file Marla's attorneys had not anticipated. By the end of the 6th week, when the court reconvened, the path forward was no longer in serious doubt. That night in the upstairs bedroom at the end of the second-floor hallway of his house, Emily stood in the doorway and did not step inside. Elijah had spent those 6 weeks preparing the room without quite letting himself believe she would ever see it. The walls had been painted the soft blue of a sky an hour after sunrise. There was a low bookshelf along one wall already filled, and there was a brown teddy bear on the pillow with a small green ribbon at its neck. A nightlight in the shape of a crescent moon glowed at low warmth on the dresser. The bed had been turned down. There was a folded pair of pajamas on the corner of the quilt soft cotton, the right size, with small stars on them. Emily looked at all of it from the threshold. She did not cross the line of the door. "What if I make a mistake?" she asked very quietly. Elijah had been standing behind her. He came around her slowly so that he was not blocking her exit, and he lowered himself to sit cross-legged in the hallway so that his face was below the level of hers for the first time all day. "Then I'm still here," he said. "Making a mistake doesn't mean being left. That is the only rule of this house." Her hand went to the pocket of the dress. She drew out the small race car watch and held it out to him on her open palm. He looked at it for a long time. He had carried it for 3 years. He had not been outside without it since the morning of the funeral. He had imagined often what it might feel like to set it down. He had never imagined it would feel like this. He did not take it. He closed her hand around it instead, the way he had closed her hand around it in the small beige room with the two-way mirror, and he held her small fingers shut with both of his. "It's yours," he said. "I had a son who taught me how to love a child. Now I have a daughter who is teaching me how to stay. The two of you don't replace each other. The two of you are how I become a whole man." Emily did not say anything. She stepped across the threshold of the room. She walked to the bed and she set the watch on the nightstand beside the moon, and she stood looking at it for a moment, as if checking that it was real. Then she climbed onto the quilt and put her arms around the brown teddy bear and pressed her face into its fur. And for the first time in many years in a room of her own with a door, she was allowed to close. She let herself cry without apologizing for the sound. 15 years passed. They passed the way years pass when nothing is being stolen anymore. Slowly, ordinarily, with the small, forgettable accumulation of dinners and homework and arguments about curfews and holidays at a long table that grew louder every December as Diane Carter and Naomi Bennett and Patricia Hayes retired, now kept finding their way back to the house with covered dishes and stories. Emily Reyes graduated from the State University with a degree in social work. She wrote her senior thesis on the welfare blind spots that allow quiet children to disappear inside legally compliant homes. The summer after graduation, she took a position as a youth advocate at a regional adoption services center 2 counties over from the one where she had been found. The race car watch, its hands still stopped at 4:17, sat in a small, clear display case on the corner of her desk. She was 23 years old on the afternoon she walked through a familiar pastel balloon hallway in a civic auditorium very much like the one she remembered. The banner over the stage read, "Every child deserves a home," in the same gold cursive that had hung above her own missing childhood. In the back corner of the last row, a small boy sat alone. He was about 7. He was holding a worn nylon backpack on his lap, and the toes of his sneakers had begun to split along the seam. No one had brought him a cookie. No one was looking. Emily walked down the aisle without hurrying. She knelt beside his chair. She did not take off her own shoes. The world was a different world now, and what this child needed was not a symbol, but a question asked the right way by an adult who would actually wait for the answer. "I see you," she said gently. "Will you tell me about your day?" The boy lifted his head. His eyes widened a little, the way the eyes of children widen when they are discovering in real time that a thing they had assumed to be impossible is in fact possible. He opened his mouth. He started to speak. Across the long room, leaning against a column with his hands in the pockets of a dark coat, a man with silver at his temples watched the two of them and smiled. Elijah Brooks was 56 now. The race car watch had not been in his pocket for a long time. It had been on a desk 20 miles away since the morning of his daughter's college graduation, and he had walked out of the house every morning since without it, and felt every morning that this was correct. A circle had closed. A new one had begun. There are people in this world who will never get to change very much. Most of us will not give the speech that ends the war. Most of us will not write the law that saves the country. Most of us will live ordinary lives in ordinary rooms, and the world will not stop to thank us when we do. But every one of us, without exception, has the power to change one entire world. A child is a world, a neighbor is a world. The stranger sitting in the back row, the one no one is bringing a cookie, to the one who has learned to apologize for being hungry is a world. We change those worlds in unspectacular ways. By stopping, by kneeling, by asking the question and then by waiting without rushing for the answer. By staying in the room when the easy thing would be to leave it. By becoming for one small person the proof they were beginning to stop believing in that being a mistake and being abandoned are not the same thing. And the strange and lovely truth, the one this story has been quietly trying to tell from the beginning, is that the child you choose to see today often grows up to become the adult who sees the next child. That is how kindness travels through generations, not by speeches, not by money. Quietly, person by person, knee by knee, sentence by sentence, in the back rows of rooms full of people who had stopped looking,